Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card is a penny slider card. These cards have been around for a really long time. I have personally never made one, so I thought now would be a good time to try. So when you tilt it to the right and the left, your object rolls, and there are actually two pennies built into it to weigh it down against that slot. And then I also have a sentiment on the inside. So I am going to be using this clearly besotted set called Let's Roll, and that's kind of why I've decided to do this penny slider, and my Landscape Trio by Mama Elephant. So I'm going to start off by stamping two hedgehogs on a piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock with Memento Tuxedo Black ink. And I just decided to stamp them at the same time to save time. So I'm going to color these with Copics, and I've only got two colors for the body of the hedgehog, the E40 and the E43. The E02 I'm just going to use to color his cheeks a little bit. But notice that I did add a neck to him just to create a little bit more dimension, and all I did was take my E43 and just kind of color a little bit underneath where his head would be, and then I extended it a little bit to the left, as you could see there, and then just blended it with my E40. So I'm going to be coloring for about another minute or so, and I'll just turn up the music and you can watch. After I color all that, I'm going to cut it out. There are matching dies that you can purchase. I don't have them, so I'm just going to use a scissor. So the next step is to actually create this penny slider. So there are three options. The first is to use a Stampin' Up! Dimensional. It's 3/8 of an inch wide, so it's the perfect size, and you can just use that. It's an easy thing to do. If you don't have that, you could take some Scotch foam tape. I'm going to tear off a piece here, and then I'm going to tear off another piece about the same size, and I'm going to double back it. So I'll peel the backing off one, and I'll just save that for later. And then I'm going to cover the sticky side of the first piece that I tore off. And the reason why I'm doing this is because it makes it a lot easier to put into a punch or a die machine. So I'm going to use this 3/8 of an inch Stampin' Up! Punch. There is one that is made, and actually I think it's discontinued, but if you have a 3/8 of an inch punch from someone else, you can certainly use that. It's a little bit of a tight squeeze, but it does fit, and you can punch it out, and that's the second way you can create these little sticky things you need. A third one is to have a die. So I found that the Avery Elle custom panel set has a 3/8 of an inch circle die. You can search your dies to see if you have any 3/8 of an inch circle, and it'll fit right there in the center of your Scotch foam tape, and you can run it through your Big Shot. So you can see I messed it up here. You have to get it right in the middle, but it's pretty easy to run through. So anyway, you're going to need two of these sticky circles to make the penny slider. Now in order to do that, you'll take the hedgehog that's gonna roll, and put the first circle in. You're going to peel off the backing, and you'll put the circle right in the middle. I didn't measure it, I just sort of eyeballed it. Put it in the middle of the hedgehog. And then you'll peel off the backing on the other side and take a penny, and you'll center it. Again, I just eyeballed it right there on top and stick it to it. And then you'll take the second adhesive circle, take the backing off on one side, adhere that to the center of your penny, and then you're just going to wait. You're not going to take the other backing off just yet. So we're going to set that aside. You can see this sandwich here. It's got a penny in the middle of the two adhesive circles. Okay, now I'm going to have this one hedgehog to the left that's going to be just sitting there idle while the one on the right rolls. So I just need to measure how far in the rolling one needs to be. So I decided I'm going to mark the bottom here with a pencil, and then I'm going to move my left hedgehog away so that I can measure where this rolling needs to stop so he doesn't bump into that left one. So I've got a bottom mark and a left mark. And you can see I'm going to measure this to make sure that I measure the slot correctly. So it's 3/8 of an inch from the edge of the circle to the edge of the hedgehog. And it just so happens that it worked out that it was 3/8 of an inch for the circle, 3/8 of an inch for each of the sides that it comes in on. So I'm going to, remember I marked the bottom of that hedgehog. I'm going to mark 3/8 of an inch up, and I'm going to make a line there with my T-square. Then I'm going to measure 3/8 of an inch up from that, and that's going to be my slot. And I'm going to measure, and I'm going to draw a line with my T-square. So that way I basically have a 3/8 of an inch slot right in the middle of my hedgehog. Now I'm just double checking to make sure the left side is also 3/8 of an inch, and it turns out that it actually is. So it's almost a complete circle, this hedgehog. So I'm going to take that left mark that I drew so it wouldn't bump into the left hedgehog. I'm going to mark 3/8 of an inch there, and then I'll just draw a vertical line. And this just makes it really easy. So all I'm doing is I'm creating a 3/8 of an inch wide slot in the middle of that hedgehog so he can move to the right and the left. And then I'm going to measure 1/2 of an inch from the right side, just to give him a little bit of breathing room so he's not butting up right up against the edge of the card when he rolls to the right. I decided to cut my slot with an X-Acto knife and a ruler and a cutting mat. Just because I thought it was easier to do it that way. You could put it in a trimmer as long as you had a trimmer that you could accurately stop at different points, and those ones with the kind of the triangular blade will work. My X-Acto knife here is probably at least 7 or 8 years old, and it is still really sharp, so I didn't have any problems cutting this slot out on the pencil line. So anyway, we'll pop it out, and you'll see a nice clean cut. Now I'm just going to measure it to make sure it fits, and it turns out that my slot is a little tight, and rather than trying to squeeze it in there and worrying that it's not going to roll, I decided I was just going to cut an extra little sliver out with my X-Acto knife again. I didn't measure it, I just cut a little sliver out, and this is really not that hard, and if it is a little bit bigger than the circle, then that's fine. Now as far as why mine was a little bit too small, it could be the way I cut it. I was kind of conservative. I didn't want it to be too big, and so I may have cut it a little bit inside the pencil lines, so the pencil lines were exact, so I needed to get it right on that pencil line. Anyway, no big deal. It can be adjusted. It doesn't have to be exact. Now I'm going to create my hills with 3 different colors of Simon Says Stamp cardstock. I'm going to put the darkest in the back, and you'll notice that this dark one I've cut a lot wider than my card width, and you'll see why in a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and die cut that first hill with the stitching so that you can see it once I cut it. And then I'm going to position it right underneath my slot, but I don't want it to touch my slot at all because I need space for my hedgehog to roll. So this gives me the ability, since it's wider, to kind of move it around and angle it the way I need it so that I get maximum coverage without hitting that slot. So I went ahead and adhered that, and then I'll cut the excess off the sides. And if there's white at the bottom, there's no big deal because I'm going to be covering it up. Now I've got my second landscape trio hill, and again, this doesn't have to be exact, so I kind of positioned it the way I wanted it, and I put my next colored cardstock underneath, and I just transferred it over carefully so that I would cut it the same way I wanted it, that I positioned it, and I ran that through my Big Shot. And so now it looks good. I've got to mark the bottom here, and I'll just trim off that excess on the bottom. But before I adhere it, I'm going to do my third one, and I'm using the same curved die that I used on my dark green. So I'm going to kind of angle it a little bit differently so it looks different. I'll transfer that down to my new color here, and I'll secure it in place with surgical tape and run it through my Big Shot. Now I'll go ahead and adhere that second color. And I waited just because I wanted to see where I wanted to place it. And it's okay if there's white at the bottom because I'm covering it. Now with this third one, I felt like the angle was a little too deep, so I just angled it off, and now it's not straight, but no big deal. I'm just going to turn it over really carefully. I'll draw the line, and then I'll trim it in my trimmer. And then when I adhere it, I'll make sure that the bottom lines up with the card base, and then I'll flip it over and I'll just trim off that excess that I got from slanting it. Anyway, so that's a nice little trick for realigning panels. Okay, now I've got this baby party animal set by Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to use the flag. I'm just going to put it in my MISTI to make sure that I stamp it in the right place, and then I'll put it on my lid and move everything else out of the way, and use some Memento Tuxedo black ink to stamp my flag. And you don't have to use a MISTI, you can just eyeball it, and that's actually what I did on the first version I did. And then I'll just stick my Post-it in there, and I'm going to create a mask. So I'll cut it out of my Post-it with some scissors, and I'll put it on my panel so that it gets covered when I do this inking. I'm going to be using a sponge dauber and some tumbled glass distress ink, and you can see that I'm kind of practicing over here off to the side with my sponge dauber, and I find that this really helps get much more even ink coverage when you prime your tool off to the side before you actually color your cardstock. And this kind of gets a nice even layer of ink on your applicator so that when it gets to the cardstock you don't have blocks or circles or heavy areas and light areas. And I'm using a very light hand because I've already got ink on my applicator because I did that off to the side. So anyway, I did a very light coating of ink here. You could see when I pull the flag off that it actually is really light. I just wanted to kind of get a hint of a sky. And now I'll stamp my sentiment right in the middle, and I wish I would have used an alignment tool, been a little bit more careful because it kind of came a little lower than I would have wanted. And I think I was thinking about that when I started coloring because I wasn't really paying attention to what I was doing. You could see I paused here to kind of figure out what the heck am I doing. When you're doing a flag, you're going to have some parts of the flag that kind of come outward and some that go inward because of the wave of the flag. And so I was trying to figure out whether I wanted my wave to go out or in, and then I got confused and they all ended up being the same color. So you could see it all blended together. So right now I'm taking my 0 and I'm removing color from the part that curves on the right, and then the left where it actually attaches to the pole. And then I went in with my W3 to make it a little bit darker, and I wasn't really happy with how this flag turned out, but I didn't want to introduce another color because I wanted it to not be a focal point. I wanted the hedgehogs to be the focal point. Anyway, so now I'm going to go ahead and put my penny slider in. So I'll just put it right there in the hole. I'll remove that second backing, and I'll add my second penny and just line it up with the first penny. It's as simple as that, and it sticks really well. So now I'm going to kind of practice and see if this actually works. And you can see I'm going to kind of roll it, and it works pretty well. So I was really happy with the way this turns out. It's so cute. So adorable. Okay, so now I'm going to adhere my little guy to the left with some dimensionals. I'm just going to pop him up. You can use any foam adhesive and just put him off to the side there. And I'm going to move my rolling one over to make sure they don't bump against each other. Now this is the Lawn Fawn Spring Shower set, and I just cut a few clouds just because I had some stitching and it matched the landscape trio, and I positioned them in the sky and just adhered them with some tape runner. Notice I put low, high, and medium. So I put 3 because odd's a good number, and then you want to make sure that they're all at different levels just to balance it out. And I'll trim the excess so I have it hanging off the side just to add a little interest also. Now for the foam tape on the back, you're going to want 2 layers. So you can see I put a first layer on, then I peeled the backing, put a next layer, and then take the backing off of that. So now I've got 2 layers. And the reason why I need 2 layers is because my penny is actually pretty thick and it requires 2 layers to have enough freedom for movement between the card base and the panel. So now I'm going to adhere this to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch card base. And I like to kind of line it up with my fingertips with my left hand, and then use my right hand to place it down, and that seems to work most of the time. And then I didn't think Let's Roll was a very good sentiment, so I added one on the inside that says Hedge, Hugs, and Kisses. So that's really my true sentiment. The first one is just to kind of describe the scene, I guess. Anyway, so here's the finished card. Rolling, so cute. I love this. Anyway, so that's the card for today. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.